Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world and joining us. Hope you enjoyed day one and welcome back. My name is Ben Chow. I am one of the representatives on the R&D Management Symposium Committee, Organizing Committee, and I'm the Operations Director at the Charles Chang Institute for Entrepreneurship. Well, we've got day two today, and beginning today's session will be Martin Wells from Wiley, and he will be presenting Publishing with Impact. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Ben, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you wherever you are, and welcome to this Publishing with Impact session that's, as you can see, brought to you by Wiley, but also the R&D Management Journal. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you've enjoyed the virtual symposium so far. You might hear, in the spirit of virtual events, you might hear the joy of family life continuing in the background. So please try not to be distracted. I'll try not to as well. So as Ben says, my name is Martin Wells, and I am the publisher responsible for business and management journals published out of the UK here at Wiley. And I manage a team in economics, business and finance, which includes the R&D Management Journal. And we're going to be talking about ways to promote your published article today. Now, there's a lot to cover in this session, and we can dig into each section as an individual presentation by themselves. So we'll only be scratching the surface today. This is really a condensed session. And you may already know a lot of this. There's nothing groundbreaking in here. But I hope this will serve as a useful refresher for those of you who are in that situation where you already know a lot of this and you're quite confident around promoting your work. So the general purpose is really to provide you with a jumping off point for considering a promotional strategy around your article and for thinking about the options available to support promotion. So let's get started. So just to give you our direction of travel today, I'll be presenting for approximately 30 to 40 minutes, probably closer to 40 minutes. And we'll have 20 minutes for questions at the end. So please enter any questions into the chat box and I'll try to answer them after we've completed the presentation. And obviously, we're going to be talking about article promotion. Now, you could ask, isn't that the journal's job or the publisher's job? You could ask those questions and the answer would be, well, yes and no. Journals and publishers need to make sure they do everything they can to optimize their online platforms so that search engines can easily crawl and index content, and publishers specifically need to actively promote journals and featured content in a crowded online space. However, we don't have ultimate control over the discoverability of content at the article level, and you do as authors. And what do we mean by impact? You know, what are our goals for our published work? And impact could be interpreted through the lens of the metrics available to us. So we're looking at downloads, broader sharing, and citations. But really, ultimately, to drive all of these metrics, we want our work to be seen as widely as possible. So here's the bad news about article promotion. It's going to mean a little bit more work. And of course, in addition to that, many of us face the sort of personal reticence to talk about our own work. It just feels wrong. But I'm here to tell you that it's oh so right, if slightly awkward to begin with. So there is a little bit of extra work here and some self-analysis. But the key takeaway from this session is that promotional activity doesn't need to be a one-off burden. It can form part of your research workflow. It can become second nature, and whisper it can be fun as well. So let's begin by looking at a couple of fundamentals to be aware of that can provide the foundations for all other promotional activity. So to ensure that our work can be seen as widely as possible, it's essential that you're explicitly credited with your work, that you're easily identifiable as the author. Name clarity is really key in ensuring a direct path for others to engage with you and your work, from citation to discussion. And we also need to make sure that our work can be located. And this is where search engine optimization, or SEO, is really essential. And because of its importance, as you come to think about your abstract, introduction, and title, it's key to consider SEO during that process, during the writing process. And finally, it's worth considering your strategy for promotion from the outset. So for example, if you're working with co-authors, does one of them have a distinct social media presence and can take the primary role in social media promotion? Or do any of you have broader media connections or a particularly good press team at their institution? Essentially, look at the opportunities in your own promotional network, evaluate those opportunities and the advantages that you have within your team. So let's begin by looking at author clarification and how you can identify yourself when the slide changes. And we'll be looking at ORCID. And one of the primary ways to ensure that you're credited for your work effectively is by registering for an ORCID ID. So what is ORCID? Well, ORCID is a non-profit and it provides unique and persistent identifiers to all who participate in research, scholarship and innovation. Why is ORCID a good idea? Well, firstly, it easily connects people to your publishing history via your ORCID record. It's a central record that's hosted on the ORCID site. And this enables you to authoritatively connect yourself with your research contributions and affiliations, irrespective of how common your name is or how many variations of it you use professionally. So it makes your work inherently more discoverable and ensures proper recognition. It allows you to have complete control over that record. So you create your own ID, you decide what to connect to it, what becomes public and what's private. And you can also elect to have your ORCID ID, ORCID record updated automatically each time you publish an article. So it intersects quite well with all of the workflows that you use and becomes a central repository for researchers as they're trying to find out more about you if they're following your work. So that's the first foundation. Make sure that you are discoverable and you have recognition for the work that you've done. So we talked about search engine optimization earlier. We talked about its importance and we talked about it being a little bit of extra work. But here's the good news, it's worth the effort. Because after all, why would you go to all of the effort of authoring an article if your research is going to be buried on page 275 of Google or Google Scholar's search results? It's worth putting the hard yards in early. And it's worth noting as well that 54% of all traffic to our online platform, Wiley Online Library, comes from search engines, and that's predominantly Google and Google Scholar. So I think we all know the importance of those generic search engines in driving researchers to the content that they want and need. And of course, scholarly information is increasingly more accessible online, but that doesn't mean it's inherently more discoverable. So employing search engine optimization, it can improve the visibility of a paper so that it has better odds of being at the top of search results and therefore better odds of being read and cited ultimately. So what can we do? What are our top tips for search engine optimization? So we've got 5 top tips here. The first one would be to create a search engine friendly title. And sort of our advice around that would be to include 1 to 2 keywords related to your topic and keep your title relatively short. And that title should be descriptive. It should refer to the central concept from your article, the central novelty of the article. Secondly, really important, you need to optimize your abstract. So place essential findings and keywords in the first 2 sentences of your abstract and repeat your keywords 2 to 3 times in the abstract. And use keywords throughout your article. You can even use keywords in the headings where possible. But you would use keywords that are consistent with your field. And we'll talk a little bit about choosing keywords in a moment. But if you're unsure about keywords that are particularly pertinent in your field, or you want to get some ideas, do take a look at a range of published articles in the field and that are related to your own article to get an idea of some of the keywords that are in use in the space. And as you're deploying those keywords in your abstract and throughout your manuscript, let them flow naturally and in a contextual way. Search engines dislike too much keyword repetition. And again, we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. Be consistent throughout the manuscript. So refer to author names and initials in a consistent manner throughout the paper. and be consistent with any previous publications. So when you're referring to other authors or referring to your previously published work, ensure that you're being consistent in the way that you're utilizing names to ensure consistent citation. And really importantly, build inbound links. And what that means is to link to your article across your social media, network and institutional platforms. The more inbound links to your article, the more search engines will value and highlight your article. You can also encourage colleagues to link to your article as well, because the more links from respected individuals and trusted sites, the more powerful the effect. And obviously you can reciprocate to colleagues as well as they're promoting their own articles as well. So if we're to use SEO effectively, we'll need to ensure that we've selected the most effective keywords for our article and presented them in the most effective way in our manuscript. So with this image, I'm not suggesting that you're all browsing for Lady Gaga style sunglasses, and of course, no judgment if you are. You've probably seen these strings of somewhat unrelated keywords sort of stuffed into product descriptions here and there, and sometimes they're absolutely hilarious. Well, as we know, Google continually updating their algorithm within the search, and they update that to see beyond these kind of strings of what we call keyword bait. And that algorithm for Google is now looking for natural connections between keywords and the page or the article's content. So in that context, how best to choose and deploy keywords? So a good place to start is to think about what someone might search on to find your article. And oddly, the phrase or the first 3 or 4 words that pop into your head can actually often be what you should include in your article title when you're thinking about your work. That will usually be what appears in someone else's mind as they're thinking about it. But a couple of good examples on the right-hand side here from completely unrelated subject disciplines to our own. On the right-hand side, these are kind of optimized article titles from in the broader portfolio. And you can see from both of these titles that the keywords lead the title, and you can even hear the search terms in the title. So they've literally, there's a colon, and then we move into a series of keywords based on an initial question. But you can also use a tool to help to think about finding relevant keywords for your article. You can use Google's keyword planner or rank checker. You would have to sign up for free registration to use them, but they'll help you find terms which relate to your article subject matter that are popular keywords or search terms to use. So if you're struggling, you can use a tool to help. And it's a bit of a no-brainer, but make sure the keywords you choose accurately reflect the content of your article. You don't want to plug in keywords that have really strayed from your article's content, so try and stay focused. And during the submission process, be sure to use the keywords field to your advantage. You not only need to enter the keywords from your article title and abstract, but also synonyms. Is there another name or acronym for a concept or study that you're featuring in your research? Include it there in the keyword field on submission, because that will provide some additional metadata to be published alongside your paper. And again, just to emphasize, repeat keywords in your abstract in ways that make sense. So it's important to repeat your keywords in your abstract and within the broader paper, but once again, make sure they're utilized in a way that achieves your primary objective, which should be to communicate the content of your article, to communicate your research most effectively. So let's move on from SEO and let's start thinking about open access, open research more broadly, and the opportunities that these initiatives provide you for drawing more attention to your work. So I should say at the outset that open access is a huge topic. We could do an entire session on open access, and perhaps for future symposia, we will do that. Here, we're just going to be scratching the surface, really looking at the basics, just to give you a flavor so you can look into things further. So open access, as we know it today, has evolved over the last 2 decades. And over this period, many initiatives and policies have emerged to support open access and are paving the way toward a world without paywalls, where publicly funded research is available to all. Now, academic publishers have responded by creating new publishing models to cater for the needs of researchers to publish open access in order to fulfill the new requirements of funding bodies. While open access has also evolved to incorporate other facets of research communication, and it's become open research more broadly. And open research really, in broad terms, describes a future where answers and evidence are more accessible to the world, and that makes advances quicker, enables broader discussion, critique, and social impact. And open research broadly includes open data, open practices, and so on. There's a list here. I'm not going to go into all of them for reasons of time today. We're going to look particularly quickly at open access and a little bit at open data. But it's worth being aware of the opportunities around open research that may be available to you as you're publishing your article. So I'm just going to have a quick drink. Excuse me. It's not a cocktail. So we're going to talk about open access. So open access, for those of you who are not as familiar with it, is obviously built on the idea that the world's knowledge is more powerful when it is shared. It's about making publicly funded research freely available. And one of the benefits of that, one of the benefits of open access specifically, clearly is the increased exposure and visibility that it brings. Undoubtedly, more researchers will read your papers if they're readily accessible and free to read. And there's also a philanthropic element, as it ensures your work's accessible to researchers who may not enjoy the level of traditional journal access. And this provides a diversity of readership outside of the regular subscription channels. And in terms of routes to open access, there are two options, known as gold and green. There are others, but these are the most prominent. And we'll look at them in a little bit more detail over the next few slides. But gold open access is generally is where an author pays an article publication charge on acceptance of their article in a journal. And that means that the article is then immediately freely available online to read, download, and share. So gold open access is where there is a payment involved for the open access element to be engaged. Green open access is generally known as self-archiving, and the author can self-archive a version of the subscription article in an online repository or website. So there's a slightly different process for that, and we'll look at that a little bit in a minute. So let's have a little look at open access. And obviously, as I've said, open access is where there is a payment of an article publication charge for that open access element to be activated. Now, gold open access is available in both in fully open access journals. So you will know that most publishers now have a substantial open access portfolio of journals that purely publish open access material built on this gold open access model. But the other option is to publish in a hybrid subscription journal. So that is an existing subscription journal that offers an open access element. And that would be like the R&D management journal, where we are a subscription journal, but we have an open access option that would be facilitated by an APC under the gold model. So obviously there's a payment involved here. Who pays the open access fees? Well, you, the author, can. If you have that money available to you, that's completely fine. The author can take that payment. Obviously, that's very rare. Institutions will often, and libraries, institutional libraries will often have a central fund of open access funding that can be drawn down by researchers at the institution for open access. So it's worth inquiring with your library. Similarly, societies, if you're affiliated to a society, they may also have an open access fund that you can draw from. Now, I don't know if you can see the end of the picture there, but the last one there would be funders. And what we're seeing more commonly now is that many funders are including provision for open access publishing in their funding awards. So I guess the point here is that there are options. Open access does not need to be limited. You may have more options than you think. And on that note, as the open access, the shift towards an open access future accelerates, particularly in Europe, but generally around the world, we're seeing more and more the negotiation of transitional agreements at the national level. And a transitional agreement is a contract negotiated between institutions, so libraries, and national and regional consortia, and publishers that transition the business model over a period of time, moving from one based on paywall access, so around subscriptions, to one in which publishers are paid for their open access publishing services. And this enables institutions, researchers, and publishers to transition to a more open future in a sustainable way. Now, that is a big shift from open access policy in recent years. This is happening at the government level, at the national level. So, for example, Wiley currently has 8 transitional agreements in Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and the UK. And what that means is that researchers in those countries who are affiliated with institutions in those countries are able to publish in Wiley journals, open access at no direct cost to themselves. So it's a really, really great opportunity for authors to really take advantage of open access. So as you're going through the publishing process, be aware of the open access options that are there for you, whether that's additional funding via institution or society or funder, but also whether or not you're eligible under a transitional agreement. So moving on from gold, we'll have a very quick look at green, and effectively green open access is around self-archiving, as I've said. And the author can self-archive a version of the subscription article in an online repository or website. But there are key distinctions between the acceptable archiving options for different versions of your manuscript. So I'll kind of summarize, but the submitted version we would describe as the first submitted article pre-peer review, and authors are permitted to archive that preprint version at any time and can link through to the published version of record once it is online. So the preprint version can act as a kind of shock troop for your eventually published article if it makes it through peer review. The accepted version we would describe as the final peer-reviewed and accepted version, but prior to typesetting and proofing by a publisher's production team. And that version of the article can be self-archived in an institutional repository or equivalent after an embargo period. And that embargo period does vary. It can be from 12 to 24 months. It can vary by journal and publisher. So you do check that before you archive that version of your article. But the submitted version, you can archive at any time. So let's just quickly talk about open data. And as we know, research data is generally it's as important as the published article itself. And if the idea is that if we share our data, it makes the research process more efficient. You can access and analyze each other's findings and reuse them to inform new findings in a much more quick and effective way, and kind of methodologies can be assessed in a more detailed way. But also sharing your data brings your own research process to life. It enables fellow researchers to engage with your work, expand on it, and cite it in a different way. It adds value to your manuscript in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been there before. So I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but do be aware of the potential to archive your data and link through from it from your final article. So let's move on to look at options to share your article. So directing people to your research in multiple ways is key to accelerating impact. So we talk about sharing because without broad dissemination, if no one hears about your work, it never really happened. So identify the sharing options available to you and the primary social media channels to engage with your community and beyond. And we'd advise planning a near and far approach. So near would involve looking at the article sharing options that you have available and ensuring that key strategic contacts have access to your paper. And far would involve thinking about how to engage with your immediate community. If you could look for some interdisciplinary engagement, or potentially looking at audiences outside of the academic community where appropriate. So there are different levels of kind of community engagement that you can adjust for. So article sharing would be part of that near approach. And publishers often offer initiatives to support sharing for accepted authors. So know what opportunities are available to you in order to maximize the dissemination of your work. So for example, at Wiley, we have content sharing, which is a really straightforward tool for existing subscribers to share full text articles with non-subscribers. And basically, if you have access to the content, you click on a share button, it generates a shareable link for you to share the full text article with friends and colleagues, and recipients of the article, of the link, will be able to view the full article online. So it's a straightforward way to share your work once it's online. But then also for accepted authors, we have the article share function. So once your article has been accepted, you will be able to nominate 10 colleagues for whom you can give full text access to your article on publication. The article is automatically shared as soon as it publishes online, so the system does it for you, and it allows you to hand select those some influential colleagues who can help create impact for your research at that early stage once it's online. But in addition to that, we talked a little bit about green open access. If there is a preprint self-archive version of your paper, an early working version, you can use that also to build interest through community discussion. You will eventually link through to the published article from there, but a preprint allows you to kind of prime your audience for full publication. So it's a good conversation starter as the paper is kind of moving through the production process. So let's move on to the dreaded topic of social media. And here we're talking primarily about Twitter, but there may be preferable social media channels for your community. These principles remain relevant in most cases. So firstly, you would say talk about your work via your social media channels. Don't be afraid to do so, and direct colleagues to your paper on publication as a basic kind of level. Make sure that we're driving people towards that article. Engage in discussion of your work with your network, even outside of the publication process. Be active, respond to inquiries, and within those discussions, frame some of your posts as questions to invite discussion and generate interest. And the idea is to try to add value rather than simply linking to your article and expecting people to go there. Broaden the discussion by engaging with other prominent accounts in the subject area, be that societies, institutions, or individuals, and be sure to ask your institution or affiliated society to post about your article. Any opportunity you have to amplify your social media posts, do that. And quite a good point is to try and accompany any posts with images. Images are known to improve the interest in individual posts, but obviously it depends on the image, of course. Don't get yourself in trouble. So also relating obviously to social media are hashtags, and just a few points here about hashtags. We know they can increase engagement by 50%. One or more hashtags can increase retweets by 55%. But it's also worth noting that 3 or more hashtags can decrease engagement by 17%. So I think the point here is that hashtags can be really useful in making sure that your posts become part of a broader conversation, but we need to be judicious about how we use them, and we need to be strategic about the hashtags we use. And to help us be strategic around hashtags, there are a number of online tools available. I've included 3 here. Right Tag, Hashtagify, and Keyhole, and each of these will provide kind of analysis of potential hashtags in your area and look at their success and their performance. Keyhole, the last one there, will relate hashtag performance by time and influencer. And that influencer information is really useful because it can help enhance your social listening. So you can know who actually are the key accounts related to particular discussions, and you can be a bit more targeted about how you kind of how you engage. And remember, really no tool can guarantee success, so you can try out these hashtag tools, see which ones work for you. You may already have a really successful social media presence, so these are just suggestions. So we'd ask you to talk about your research a lot. And really what we're saying is a published article alone does not generate interest. So you've got to be your own salesperson and maximize the attention paid to your work. As noted before, this will involve a near and far approach, and that would be that would look at hailing a core interest group, the wider subject community, and if the work has broader interest, perhaps the public beyond. But in all cases, you'll need to ensure that your voice as a researcher is heard. And there are multiple avenues for doing that. We've got some here: conferences, presentations, networking, and via the media. So we'll just have a quick look at this for conferences. And this is, as you know, we all know these guidelines, but for conference attendance, but it's worth just revisiting. The first, plan ahead, make sure you know the schedule and think about the sessions that you're going to go to each time. Do not get caught at the donut stand in the coffee break and stay there for 2 hours. Stick to a schedule and have some clear objectives for the conference. Really important to follow and use the conference hashtag, engage in the social media conversation around the conference, use it to promote any sessions that you're undertaking or any activities that you've got going on. Another really important thing to be aware of, it's really good to have an elevator pitch, or I sometimes call it a one-sentence sales pitch for your work. So you can really quickly condense and communicate the essence of your work to people in really short period of time. Have that ready for those networking conversations. Don't stick to the larger events. Make sure you plan to go to some of the satellite events, the smaller events, and there where really you can start building. If you're an early career researcher, start building some of those networks, have those really good conversations. Aim to meet a few new people each day. That's it sounds odd, but you can factor that into your planning. Make sure you're in the right places that you can actually do that each day for a short period. And after the conference, if you've networked, you've made connections, make sure that you follow up afterwards via email. Make sure that you complete any commitments that you've held to during the conference. And so we talked about conferences and we mentioned networking there. And networking is a horrible word. It smacks of management talk. It fills most people with trepidation, at least it does me. But there's a few tips to consider here. Ultimately, though, you need to prepare to get awkward. So it's do it yourself. No one is going to do it for you. The onus is on you to go to lots of conferences, give talks, present posters, take part in discussions, and use every opportunity you have to talk to people. And it does take up a lot of courage to talk, to speak to strangers. But if you want to build contacts and build your network, that's exactly what you'll need to do. And we all know someone who finds it really easy to start conversations and seems to be able to do that with anyone. But the reality is that even for those people, there are easy conversations, there are awkward conversations, and conversations they wish they never started in the first place. So this means that you shouldn't be put off the first few times that you sort of engage in active networking. If there are some awkward silences or the conversation doesn't flow, it's really normal. And after a while, you'll begin to feel more comfortable with bringing up the topics that people respond to. One of the easiest ways to get people talking initially is to ask them questions about their presentations or their work. It's safe and familiar ground. And another thing as well is that just because you're perhaps a student or a postdoc, you think that, say, Professor I am famous won't want to talk to you. Well, most of the time, the opposite is true. Professors love to talk to enthusiastic young researchers. That's why they're in the game. So another thing in terms of planning, one useful thing at conferences is to save your questions until you can find the speaker in the next conference break. Then you could introduce yourself and ask your question one-on-one. Might seem a little bit like stalking, but you've got to put yourself in the place to, where they will be to get that one-to-one. Because introducing yourself is a key step that doesn't happen in a lecture hall full of people, and one-to-one contact is effective because it's personal. And then finally, again, be sure to follow up on any commitments you've made at the conference. Honouring those commitments is the key to building trust and to building your own reputation as a reliable person. And from social media to the media itself, So as researchers, communicating our work is vital, but approaching the media can be daunting in a crowded arena, particularly when you're in the early days of your career. And we can't all become media darlings overnight, but these tips can help you get started to try and bring your research to the world beyond the conference hall. So firstly, I'd say don't be afraid of the media. We all want our work to be presented accurately, and so does any reputable media outlet. And anxiety can come with sharing your work with the media, generally from a fear of misrepresentation. But in reality, few journalists want to misrepresent your story, and the best way to make sure they get an accurate view is to be the one discussing it with them. So we say, make the first move. Journalists can only talk about what they know exists. So make a personal connection with a journalist. It gives you an avenue to talk about your work. And you could also become an expert that they go to in the future when they're looking for kind of talking heads. Don't just rely on email. Email fatigue isn't exclusive to researchers, and many press releases are going to sit unread in a journalist inbox. So whether it's via Twitter or a phone call, find ways to get in touch that make you stand out from the noise. And probably most importantly, use the expertise around you, whether that's university, institutional, or departmental. Press officers can help you at every stage of a media journey. And obviously universities aim to increase their profile. So if your story could be significant news, they'll be happy to help. They might send out a press release or help you to pitch an article to an online platform, such as The Conversation, for example. So reach out to them early so they can factor you into their plans. Think about your story. Your research may be compelling to those in your field, but it's vital that the public can understand and connect with your work. It's fundamentally any relationship with the media is a proxy for relating to the public. But if you can make your work relatable to everyday practicalities, there's a higher chance that it will be noticed as newsworthy from the start. And consider your outlet. Instinctively, we gravitate towards the big news outlets to get the word out far and wide. But in practice, you can often achieve much better reach by using local media outlets, non-digital media such as radio, as well as digital media such as podcasts and blogs. So let's talk about diversifying content. And the published article is essentially the central hub in the wheel of your promotional strategy, with multiple spokes represented by multiple forms of content shared via a range of platforms, drawing readers back to the version of record. So no matter where you share your research, the content you post that relates to that article, to your article, should grab attention and be diverse enough to keep attention. So blog posts, podcasts, slide shares, etc., are all examples of great content that you can share. Now, if you want help creating content around your article, Wiley Editing Services offers professional video design and writing services to create shareable video abstracts, infographics, conference posters, etc., to help enhance the content around your article. So don't hesitate to look out for publisher services and resources when working through this. So we're just going to have a quick whistle-stop look at a few examples of ways in which you can expand on your article to generate additional content. So we talked a little bit about conferences, and you may be at a conference. Congratulations, you may have had a submission accepted, and you may be giving a poster presentation. You may have given a poster presentation recently virtually. So how does one design an effective conference poster? So this is obviously looking us being in a physical environment. This advice may change completely if we move into a completely virtual conference situation in the future. But these are 5 things to remember when crafting an effective conference poster presentation. And actually they're quite kind of consistent no matter how you're putting those presentations together. So firstly, tell a coherent story. Think about how your audience are going to experience your work. Often you'll only have about 5 minutes or less to relay your findings to someone, and it's easier to do this when you have a well-organized, cohesive, and engaging story to tell. Start with a descriptive but specific title, and people will often decide to talk to you based on a combination of your title and your poster's visual appearance. So really take care in crafting both. And the second point there is we're talking about the visual element. Go beyond words. Effective posters use visual imagery to convey information. the visual appearance in addition to your title is what people will use to determine their interest. So for the sake of your audience, use photos, figures, timelines, and graphs to tell your story. And remember, for the most part, that you're going to be right there to guide your observer's experience. Cater to your audience. So effectively communicating ideas is easier when you know your audience. So think about how your audience will experience your message, understand the content and relate. So if your audience consists of people from your immediate field that will know certain acronyms, or you can skimp on some of the detail. Whereas if your audience includes people who are not familiar with the terminology, etc., you'll need to customize your message accordingly. Now, get to the point is point 4 there. Have you ever been in the middle of a conversation, you just want it to be over? Chances are you have. I know I have. You might well be thinking about this presentation. But remember this when designing your poster. So don't frustrate your audience with an overly lengthy presentation. Try to keep the word count below 600 and prepare to effectively relay the details of your work in about 5 minutes. And show that you care. So when you present at a conference session, your presentation is a direct representation of you, your co-authors, and your institution. And remember this when crafting your presentation. In addition to being a forum for discussing research, conference sessions are social gatherings, or they were in person, where professional connections can often be made. So remember, you and your behavior during the poster session are included in this category. So be respectful and kind. Take pride in your presentation and your work. And last, but definitely not least, if we do ever get back to being in the room with each other, remember to shower. I know we've all got a bit lax during lockdown. So thinking again about the visual element, another really nice piece of content to share around a published article is an infographic. And one of the greatest things about infographics is their efficiency. So wherever there's data, an idea, or a story to tell, an infographic can be used to enhance the reader's understanding and retention of the information being presented. And they often have a longer life cycle than a traditional article. As long as the information remains relevant, they can be used as learning resources as well. So they do tend to have a longer shelf life. And infographics have come to be used just like articles or speeches. They're not just charts. And when done correctly, they tell an engaging story, and they share the same 3 objectives as public speaking. They're used to inform, engage, and persuade an audience. And generally, they're effective because we know studies estimate that 50 to 80% of the human brain is dedicated to forms of visual processing. Our brains love to soak up visuals. And when promoting complex ideas, it's ideal for people to have something they can digest easily. An infographic that shares the highlights of a complex written text visually is a great way to attract attention and build awareness with a design that's easily shareable online. And there's an example here on the right-hand side from Guy Kawasaki when he was promoting his book Enchantment. And the beautiful part of the infographic he designed was that he created simple illustrations and bullet points to highlight key elements of his book. So an infographic is a really nice piece of content to build around your article. And just very, very quickly to look at plain language abstracts, if your work has broader relevance or application for practitioners, for example, it's useful to compose a lay summary. Some journals might request this and publish it alongside the regular abstract, but even if it's not directly requested as part of journal submission, it's worth putting together to assist in approaching alternative media outlets and kind of devising workshops or as a learning resource. And some very quick key pointers in putting together a plain language abstract would be to avoid jargon, talk directly to the reader, understand your audience, as with your conference paper, communicate the core novelty and why it's important to that audience. And most importantly, put your research into context. So be clear on the potential broader impact for practitioners, for example. And just finally, another potential avenue for content would be a video abstract. Now, what is a video abstract? Well, it's essentially a short video introduction that interests the reader in one's article. The article would obviously continue to have a text abstract, but the video supplement adds a new dimension and draws new readers to the article. We know that video is a powerful way to communicate research findings, have proven impact on article usage metrics. We recently did some analysis to compare key article uses metrics of articles with a video against the average metric values of articles without. And articles with a video averaged 447% higher altmetric attention scores, 111% higher full text views on Wiley Online Library. They're really, really effective. And looking at journals with very established approaches to video abstract, without exception, the articles with video abstracts were downloaded more than those without. Articles with video abstracts had, I think, around 82% more full text downloads. So I'm not going to go into detail around what to do around a video abstract, but some key points for you to take away. Be mindful of length, try to keep it to 3 to 5 minutes. Be mindful of production values, be aware of your background. The opportunity to get really creative, those that kind of involve role play and a kind of interesting take on communication are often those that are really well received. But do seek out help at your institution or via your publisher for help in putting together video abstracts, because there are often resources available for you to draw on. So that brings us to the final summary here. And so the key takeaways really that I want you to kind of take away is around preparation. So prepare. Do you have the foundations in place and a plan to maximize promotional opportunities? It'd be good to think about open research, to be aware of the open access and open research options for your article to ensure you're taking advantage of the potential for that additional exposure that the open access brings. Engage in active promotion. Promotion needs to be actively undertaken. So take ownership of the strategy for generating interest around your work, and you can be thinking about that right the way through the writing process, right the way through to publication. And create diverse content. Put your article at the center of a network of related content. Ensure you've got multiple avenues through which people can engage with your work. So I think they're the key takeaways we can take away today. And that brings us to the end. Thank you all for listening. We've got time for some questions now. Before we do, Ben, if you'd like further information or access to supporting resources around article promotion, please visit the homepage for R&D Management Journal, where we've collated some of the relevant information. Alternatively, if you have any questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to contact me directly or the R&D Management Editorial Office, and we'll be happy to engage with you. Ben, if there are any questions on the chat.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Martin. I think you've spoken for quite a long period, and we really appreciate it. We have just over 20 minutes for Q&A. It's been very helpful tips, and for academics, young and old. As a reminder, as Martin mentioned, to our audience, we do have the chat window available for yourself in terms of typing in your questions. And I will be monitoring these chat windows in terms of for questions for Martin. We don't have any questions right now. I believe everybody's just forming their thoughts, but perhaps I could open up with some questions. I think your presentation is very engaging. I think it was very helpful in terms of some of the tips. There's one that I thought will be relevant in today's world, and it's just networking. I think in the current world, many of the suggestions, rightfully so, is for in-person conferences. But what have you seen in the virtual world that will help young academics perhaps navigate today and perhaps in the near future, Martin, in terms of networking?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as you're working through the presentation, you're thinking about the way in which we've engaged in these activities in the past. And it's very much based in that old world, the in-person conference, the conversation in the coffee break, etc. But what I have seen, and what's evident to me with kind of early career researchers building their networks, is that a lot of this work is happening online. It's happening via social media. So we see a lot of engagement with ResearchGate as a kind of collaboration tool. We see a lot of engagement via Twitter is so important. I know it's kind of it's become a slightly hateful medium as well, but it's so important to researchers to engage with each other, to build connections. I know myself, I've built so many contacts via Twitter, but also LinkedIn has been a really useful tool for this kind of networking, sort of professional networking. So I think when we're thinking about promotional strategies for our articles, what we're also thinking about is kind of career development strategies as well. And I think now, as we're moving into a broader kind of virtual environment, it's good for primarily early career researchers, but researchers sort of further on in the career, as we're seeing this shift towards a more virtual environment, is to build their kind of online profile. So that could be via their ORCID ID, making sure that they've got a central record for their publishing output, making sure that they're engaging with colleagues on social media, and making sure that they're driving people towards their published output. So I think it is having those foundations in place as we transition to a more virtual environment for conferences and things where there aren't the same opportunities for in-person contact.
Great, thank you. No, that's a very, very informative and very quite elaborate answer, and I really appreciate it. And I think some of the young academics in today's world will appreciate that as well. I guess another question I have is, you mentioned Twitter, and you also mentioned ORCID. You know, Wiley has been a historic global publisher, recognized publisher, and I wonder how long has Wiley been adopting this type of new media avenues as part of their strategy? And you know, you did mention ORCID, and I was just wondering if there's any other types of new media that Wiley has adopted or embraced over the past few years.
So in terms of new media, I think it's probably, I mean, the ORCID IDs have been around for a while. You know, they're fairly embedded now in the kind of research environment. In fact, I think most of our journals now require an ORCID ID on submission, because it just makes, you know, knowing who everyone is, particularly now with so much research being submitted, so much material out there, it's doubly important. So that's something we kind of have been engaging with for a long time. To kind of look ahead in terms of developments in publishing, in terms of technological developments, what, you know, many of our listeners will know is that submitting to a journal can be a laborious process. We're submitting to multiple online submission sites. It requires you to set up a new account each time. It requires you to enter your information over and over again. It becomes a really time-consuming activity. And what we're looking at the moment, and which is quite far down the line now, we're nearly close to kind of releasing it, is to have a system which is kind of a submission ecosystem where authors can submit to the ecosystem, enter their information once, and then that's it. It moves through into the submission system, and it really reduces that kind of that level of kind of laborious administration. It uses a lot of AI to kind of pull out the metadata from a manuscript and complete those details automatically. So that is kind of one of the elements that we'll be looking at technologically. But what that will also do from a promotional perspective would it be to allow us to pull out kind of the keyword information, to use that more effectively when we're doing our promotional activities as well, to really dig into that metadata. But on other notes, I think, you know, we've recently reached an agreement with ResearchGate, and obviously ResearchGate have been quite a controversial site. They're kind of there's a lot of kind of piracy involved there, people just posting copyrighted material. But, you know, Wiley are of the understanding that, you know, the world is moving towards very much an article-based, open sharing economy, and we need to sort of engage with that as you know, an innovation in publishing rather than a stake in the ground. So we've reached an agreement with ResearchGate, so we'll be working with them to kind of highlight key content and things. So I think we'll be looking at technological advancement that makes it easier for authors to engage with journals, makes their lives easier, that makes it easier for us to promote that material, and also to engage with open access, open research, and open collaboration. So where there are tools that can facilitate that, that's where we'll be working in those spaces. Okay.
No, thank you very much, Martin. As for the listeners out there, for the audience, we are speaking with Martin Wells, a publisher with Wiley. As a reminder, again, please type in your questions in the chat window just beside your viewing window. And we appreciate the questions from the audience. So far, there aren't any questions. It must be must be most of the morning people because they're just waking up, I guess. I'll continue with my questions. I found as you were presenting. I'm just wondering from the overall, the symposium today is about creating conditions with impact and very much innovation and innovative focus. I was just wondering, overall, like you don't have to give an exact number, but I was just wondering the type of journals that Wiley represents. Is there anything that's specifically to? Can you name a few titles that are specific to what some of the themes are in the symposium, where it be innovation policy, from entrepreneurial strategy, or innovation intermediaries?
Yeah, I mean, across our portfolio in kind of the team that I manage and the team that I work in, we run the gamut across business and finance. So we move from kind of really hardline decision sciences right the way through to kind of marketing and everything in between. But I think that the journals that I manage that are really pertinent to the symposium, obviously R&D Management Journal, which is the official journal of the R&D Management Association, is a journal that really focuses on this innovation space, looking towards trying to broaden into that sort of technological innovation and how that works as well, not just in the kind of management of innovation in an organization. So I would definitely check out the R&D Management Journal if colleagues haven't. But I also manage the Creativity and Innovation Management, which has really interesting perspective, which focuses a little bit on creativity in organizations, which I find particularly interesting. And so that, taking a kind of almost often a humanities-based approach to that. So Creativity and Innovation Management is another journal that would be really relevant in this space. I think the big hitter probably that we have is the Strategic Management Journal as well, that looks at these kind of issues on a much more broad base. So those are titles I think in the Wiley portfolio that would be really relevant to the conference. But particularly, I think we have a number of special issues that would be relevant for delegates of the symposium. Now, you'll ask me the titles of those special issues. I can't remember, which is shocking. I can get a slap wrist. But do visit the R&D Management website. If you Google R&D Management Journal, it will be the top record there. That's search engine optimization at its most effective. And there'll be all the information there about the calls for papers, and there'll be resources there around article promotion as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. So far, no questions, but I do have one more, perhaps. We do have a bit more time. So my question has to do with, I found it very interesting, the part of your presentation, you're talking about open access. And I guess this is similar to the analogy or the approach that software has taken in computer software to create a community of innovation and essentially reduce barriers. So what would you say, in terms of, I guess, proportion of papers that represent this type of new trend where you want to have that open access and build that interest in the research or in the content of your paper?
So I think at the moment, I think in sort of pure numbers, if I remember correctly, that open access papers make up 6% of the whole of all research published, which is quite incredible, really. That's grown from a very low base very quickly. And, the projections are that over the next, I think, two years, potentially, that's going to go up to 11%. And we're seeing year-on-year increase in open access submissions. But we're also, alongside that, seeing an increase in government interest in open access policies and making sure that publicly funded research is broadly available. And there are globally different approaches to this. There are some places that emphasize green. In Europe, gold open access is pretty much the norm. And as I talked about transitional agreements, this is very much becoming a kind of national negotiation that happens with consortia. So we are seeing OA submissions increase, and the likelihood is as funders mandate open access more, as it becomes mandated more by through government agreements, and these transitional agreements become more widespread, we're going to see that increase a lot more quickly, I think, and see that shift between a subscription model and an open access model. So I guess in answer to your question, I guess we're going to continue to see an increase in submissions, and that's driven by kind of external factors. It's the market that's driving this. It's not a kind of publisher-driven element. So we're responding and trying to kind of ensure that we can manage this transition so that we can provide all the services that we provide to authors now, that we can continue to do that as we transition to a sustainable open access future. That's where we'd be. But obviously, I think with the pandemic, with the global health emergency, we've seen open access become more prominent in the media because, access to fundamental research, access to new research quickly, having that shared quickly and allowed to be built upon has become vital to kind of dealing with both medically with the virus, but dealing with kind of behavioral psychology areas and kind of looking at how organizations are going to structure themselves. So right across, interdisciplinary wise, OA is becoming important to deal with kind of the big questions in the world.
Great. Thank you very much, Martin. We don't have any questions right now, but those were essentially the questions that I had while I was seeing through your presentation. And you mentioned the transitional agreements, which was relatively new to me in terms of information. So I think that's very, it's very indicative of what you had mentioned in terms of the approach and I guess the strategies that some countries are taking towards open access and to really encourage that innovation, which could be a whole other topic for, another symposium, perhaps.
I should say as well, Ben, that actually I think there are negotiations underway in Canada, but in the US particularly, those negotiations are happening at a kind of state level. So we do have agreements in Virginia and we have agreements in Ohio. So you can sort of get a sense of the kind of granular nature of these discussions. They're very sort of, each deal is slightly different and the negotiations are happening in different ways in different countries.
Yeah, and that was almost like a second part of my question, was just determining what other parts of the world or specific regions where there is growing interest. So I'm glad you answered that question, which was essentially a follow-on question that I had. I think we do have just over 5 minutes, but if you're happy, I think we've I think it was very informative, and we could just cut short a little bit your presentation in terms of your time, but closing remarks.
Is a process, and I think when we talk about article promotion, it's about thinking about your work in the broader kind of ecosystem of the activities that you undertake, and sort of putting it into that context as part of your kind of research workflow, your career, all of that, then makes it a little bit easier to engage with. So I think that is kind of the way I would think about it and what I'd like people to take away from this. But again, if anyone has any questions, happy for people to contact me directly after the session.
Great. Thank you very much, Martin. And thank you again for taking the time today. I'm sure our audience is very appreciative of the tips that you've provided, and I certainly have. We do have, I guess, probably about a 10-minute transition break now, but please do rejoin us for our keynote speaker, Dr. Ashish Arora of Duke University, who will present the changing role of corporate research labs and universities. After the keynote there, we will continue with our regular programming in terms of the parallel sessions, and then we will also have our panel discussion. And please do enjoy the rest of the day in our symposium. This is day 2, and we're off to a good start. Thank you very much, everybody.